Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about two things, etiology and data tables. Now, if you are new to the Online Writing Center, we work with students in just about all of the ACU Dallas or ACU online programs through a series of support services such as webinars like this, through one-on-one consultations, by responding to emails and other things. These are all completely free, and you are more than welcome to explore and use as many or as few as you like. For one-on-one consultations, you can send emails back and forth, and there's no limit on that. If you're doing a writing consultation, to get in-depth feedback on a draft, normally you can make up to 2 appointments per week. If you have special needs, or if you have a pressing cause, you can, by request, get more than that. But we start out at 2 appointments per week, and for the pace that we have for the online programs here at ACU Online, that's more or less a sustainable pace for the normally one assignment per week, or one lengthy written assignment per week that you might be doing in this class. If you prepare your material and you submit it for feedback, then that gives you time to revise and then submit again. You can make appointments a couple weeks in advance, so do try to avoid waiting to the very last minute. Often we can work you in, but near the end of the semester it does get quite booked up, so just keep that in mind as you're scheduling appointments. You can schedule an asynchronous appointment, meaning you schedule time. By the time that rolls around, you submit your draft with any special requests for feedback, and then we send feedback to you via email, generally within 24 hours. If it's the day that a paper is due, then we will get that back to you faster. If it's a major holiday weekend, it might take a little bit longer, but generally within 24 hours. You can also request a real-time appointment, either phone or Zoom, at your preference. We have some people who will do phone calls as they're riding in the passenger seat on the way back through a busy commute with someone else driving. And we have some people who prefer to have a Zoom appointment so they can see everything on screen and have that visual reinforcement, see passages highlighted, see how functions are done in Word, that sort of thing. And it's just a question of what meets your needs, and people will switch back and forth depending on what they're doing. Alright, so if you're not familiar with the Writing Webinars archive page, if you go to the link that you see on the screen and you scroll down past the calendar of upcoming webinars, you'll see this tab guide where you can select your program, and that will show you all the webinars that we have tying in with different courses and assignments in that program. So this webinar here will be appearing in NURS DNP under the course code for the tie-in assignment. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. First, we have 4 objectives here. First, we're going to understand the assignment that we're using as the catalyst for discussion. This is coming from NURS 621, the Week 2 assignment to Etiology of Disease. Then we'll talk about one of the components of that assignment. We'll understand the table formatting rules in APA 7th edition and how to do that in Microsoft Word. How to show synthesis as also required in this assignment. And we'll finish with talking about outlining and drafting, how to convert the assignment instructions into a roadmap for what you will be working on, for how to write your paper efficiently, directly, and making sure you hit all the things required. Alright, so let's take a look at this assignment from Nursing 621. So this is coming from the Advanced Pathophysiology course, and the instructions begin with the preamble. In week 1, you are asked to identify a disease process of interest, which will be the focus of your assignments as you work toward completing the large culminating project for week 7. So whatever you chose for this, if you're in Nursing 621, whatever you chose last week, in the week 1 for the assignment, you want to be continuing to work on in this week 2 assignment. Now, if you're watching this and you haven't done the week 1 assignment yet, just a reminder that you want to be doing something that you're actually interested in working on throughout the term, because if it's something you actually don't like, or that causes revulsion every time you do reading about it, maybe you want to pick something that you're interested in spending a little time on. And people will often pick something that correlates with a practice area that they want to move into, or with patients that they've seen and they have an active interest in increasing their knowledge about and firming up. So pick something that you're interested in spending some time with, because we've got 7 weeks in this assignment, in this course. 7 weeks of recurring assignments. Alright, so now we move on to the assignment instructions themselves. In this assignment, you will state and define your identified disease process. That's thing number 1. Explain the etiology or cause of a disease, number 2. And describe the role of genetics, risk factors, and environmental factors that may lead to the development of the disease. You may create a table for the risk factors and environmental factors. There's some additional requirements here. It should be 2 to 3 pages in length, so that's body content, not counting cover page, not counting any reference pages. And you need to cite at least 1 or 2 sources that are less than 5 years old, so recent literature. And of course, it needs to follow APA formatting. Alright. Now, if we look at the rubric for this and compare it with the instructions, we need to define the identified disease process, the one that you have chosen. Alright. We need to explain the etiology of a disease and the epidemiology here. Okay, now if we're looking at this list here, so that first row in the criteria, define your identified disease process, we get that in the first part of the sentence. Now, we have the etiology of the disease, and then a clarification that the epidemiology should also be included. Alright, so that's helpful to know, because that's something that is kind of implicit in these instructions here, but the rubric makes explicit that that is something you should be doing, you should be describing and explaining. Third row, and note that defining the disease process gets 1 point. Explaining the etiology and the epidemiology, that's 2 points, so that section should probably be longer. And this next section has 6 points ascribed, so this is going to be the major part of the paper. We see, okay, we have a list here of 3 things. Describe the role of genetics on the disease, and if genetic testing is available for that. And if we look at the instructions here, we see that that is expanding role of genetics. The role of risk factors on the disease, and if modifiable, what health prevention promotion measures you can impose. That is expanding risk factors modifiable and non-modifiable. And then the role of environmental factors on the disease, and that's basically as it is in the instructions. So there's some important detail here in the rubric that we want to keep in mind, because just like a process checklist for patient safety, we want to make sure we are doing all the things. If you don't verify that you have the right patient, it's not working out. So similarly with this assignment, we want to make sure we get everything that is listed in both the regular instructions and in the rubric. And we see the last row under criteria is it the right length? Is it an APA style? Does it have the right sources? Etc. So let's, before we go any further, talk about table formatting in APA 7th edition, because that's a way to get some of the information here, the risk factors, in a concise fashion. If you're going to explain all that or list all that in paragraph format, that could take a lot of space, but a table can present this information in a nice compact form that you can refer to. So if you just take a table like this, we have a couple elements that we'll be discussing soon. So in this example here, course schedule is the table title. And the first row in the table here, that's our heading or header row, where we have the labels that say what's in each of those columns. The information in the header row is in each of those columns can also be referred to as the column headers. Now, often you will also have row headers as well, where the information in each row is labeled by something that you find in the first column. Those would be row headers. Now, you don't always have row headers. That's generally if you have data that's being separated by some category, like, oh, what week is it? And each of these individual things, delineated by the lines, we refer to as a cell. Well, that's an example of a table not formatted in APA style. If we are going to be looking at this in APA style, we have a few rules that we need to be following. And you can find them summarized at this link, which you can also find sample tables on the APA style website. But let's look at that visually. This is an example of a table in APA 7th edition. It still has a table title. In this case, this is Descriptive Statistics and Correlations for Study Variables. Note that that's in title case and it's italicized. We also have a table label where we're counting sequentially. Is this the first table in the paper? Is this the second, the 10th, etc., and just numbering from there. We still have a heading or header row. And in a sense, the first column variable is functioning the same way as that first column with the row headers, because it's telling us how this data is sorted. You know, we're seeing, oh, the data for this thing, and the data for that thing. So that is a similar function here. And note that we don't have any vertical lines at all in this table. It gives you a much cleaner look that lets the eye focus a little bit more on the data. So if we're going to go through these changes, we see, okay, the table will be numbered sequentially in the label. The label itself will be bolded. That's the table 1. For the table title, it'll be italicized and in title case. There are no vertical lines. And then for horizontal lines, that's lines going left, right, we only have 3 of them here. We have a row above the header row. We have a line above the header row. We have a line below the header row, and one at the very bottom of the table. All right. And so each cell, unless it happens to be bordered by one of those, doesn't have any lines around it. So we'll come back to that in the outlining drafting stage, but let's talk about how to show synthesis. And this is something that we go into in various webinars that you can watch if you need some reinforcement, but let's go ahead and go past these slides we've included, and so that synthesis should be part of a paragraph where you're giving different types of information and different types of discussion to show that what you're using to support your argument and how it fits together. So if you're starting each paragraph with a topic sentence, giving evidence to support that, generally drawn from the literature. So in this case, if you're describing the etiology of a disease, you're probably going to be citing a journal article, and so your summary from that will be your evidence. And then you'll discuss the evidence, that'll be the analysis. And the synthesis, when you're talking about, okay, what does all this mean together? Like, what does that mean when you take it to the clinic level or particular setting? So you might be summarizing a particular disease, and then you're talking about, oh, how does this present in the emergency room setting? Or how does this present if it's coming in urgent care? Or in a pediatrics clinic, perhaps? And each of those environments, there are different details that you'll be paying attention to or being able to go into detail. You know, the emergency department tends to be the worst place to have long-term care because people usually are not coming in with regularity and there are time constraints and all that other stuff. So if you're dealing with a particular condition in pediatrics, well, as part of long-term primary care, there are other things you can do. So which setting you decide that you are going to be discussing is an example of how you can give us what is relevant for that through synthesizing. Now, if we're talking about that synthesis. We want to make sure that it's clear that you're providing new conclusions or the application of how does this fit together. And that's often going to be answering questions like, okay, how are you as the author interpreting what you presented here? Or what should be done in light of these pieces of information you've summarized as evidence and the analysis that you've done of that evidence. Here are a couple examples. Like, these consistent results across multiple studies in diverse populations validate the applicability of the behavioral therapy model to this problem. Or, a p-value less than 0.05 is typically considered to be statistically significant, therefore the null hypothesis was rejected. Now, this is going to be a shorter, focused paper about this disease, so think about what sort of applications you would want to know if you were being trained on this disease, or if you're training someone else on this disease, what should they know? So let's dive into the outlining and drafting stage. And for this, you're going to want a copy of our APA course paper template, which you can download from the URL here. Now, I've gone ahead and downloaded a copy of the APA course paper template here. And one of the first things you're going to want to do is fill in the title of your paper, which can just be the name of the assignment. You can always replace it with a title you like better afterwards, but the name of the assignment is fine. Your name, and of course the course and instructor information, and the date that this is due. Some reminders as we go forward. Remember to follow the order laid out in the prompt. So as things are listed in the paper, that should be the general order. If things are listed in the rubric and the instructions, those are the orderings that you should be following in the paper. Also, you want to use the wording in a prompt so it's clear that you're referring to that specific thing, especially if you're a nurse. If you're coding for a generic, then the insurance that will reimburse for that generic. If you, are providing a brand name thing and then the insurance only codes for the generic, that's not going to work out from a reimbursement sense. So make sure you're using the exact wording. Make sure that any information that goes into a table gets discussed, not just placed there. And then if you're referring to a table, like Table 1, refer to it as a proper noun, like Table 1 summarizes, or shown in Table 1. All right, now let's go ahead and grab the assignment instructions and paste them into the Word doc. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to italicize this to create a clear delineation between the instructions being presented here for convenience and how you would break this down. And the first thing we're going to do is break this into segments. We have state and define your identified disease process, explain the etiology or cause of the disease, describe the role of genetics, risk factors, and environmental factors. And let's go take a peek at the rubric. And as discussed earlier, we want to make sure that any specific details or breakdowns captured in the rubric are also reflected in our outline because there's some additional detail here. So define your identified disease process. Okay, we've got that. But explain the etiology and the epidemiology. Okay, let's go ahead and add that detail to our outline as well. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy and paste that instruction here. Now the formatting, we don't want any of that stuff. We'll just change that to keep text only by clicking on this little clipboard thing. And let's go ahead and can look at this and say, all right, so this is overlap here. So I'm going to go ahead and cross that out. You could even delete it if that makes it helpful for you. But right now I just want to make sure I'm getting everything, and so doing that cross out helps me visually confirm and have that layer of detail. Alright, now for this we have a breakdown of, it looks like, 3 things: role of genetics, risk factors, and environmental factors. And let me go check that against the rubric. And again, I'm seeing a greater level of detail here. Let me go ahead and reformat that again to keep text only. And so we'll go ahead and see, okay, we have the role of genetics here is expanded. Role of genetics on the disease and if genetic testing is available. So we'll cross that out here. Risk factors modifiable and non-modifiable. So here we have a further breakdown. So, okay, we'll take that out. And the role of environmental factors on the disease. The main thing here, because we have risk factors that may lead to the development of the disease, there's a slight increase here. So just to be clear, we're going to add that role of there. And now we're going to say, okay, role of environmental factors. The only thing is this that may lead to. So we're just going to overwrite that here. And now I'm going to just take all of this out. So we have essentially a list here. 3 things that need to write about. And we can turn this into a bulleted outline for each of these sections where you're going to be developing this outline as we go. And we'll just clean up this formatting a little bit. Alright, so now we have an idea. And this section is going to be substantial. You know, the fact that it has 3 sub-bullets, those should probably each be a paragraph each, considering the amount of points allowed for this in the outline, in the rubric. And in fact, looking back at this rubric, we see, okay, define your identified disease process. That's probably going to be a short paragraph. Explain the etiology of disease and the epidemiology, 1 or 2 paragraphs. And then these describe the following, 1, 2, and 3. Those are probably going to be a paragraph each. So start with a topic sentence that tells us what you're talking about. Follow up with some evidence. And then especially for number 2 and 3, they explain the etiology and describe the following. Okay, discuss that evidence. Tell us what it means when put together. Alright, so let's take a look at things here. So one of the things you can start off by saying is, okay, what is going on here? Is this a significant role or insignificant role? And so as you're planning this out, you can start out by just filling out this checklist. Okay, is it significant or not? Is there genetic testing available? Any other things? Because there could be genetic testing available, but it's so expensive and the insurance companies never approve it that you're less likely to use it, or it's not accessible in your care environment. So give us key details like that. And just because something is indicated doesn't mean that it's always expressed. You know, that we have variable expression and incomplete penetrance. Is there a family history? Or is this a kind of novus mutation? That sort of detail can go into here. Now, the risk factors on the disease, well, okay, so if we have non-genetic risk factors, or just general things in general, you can discuss them here. But this section here in particular, environmental factors, okay, things that are not just what you're born with, but things you might be doing or be exposed to this is where you start listing those here. Now, for the sake of argument, let's say that here and let's see, okay, so how are we going to answer this prompt? Okay, we might end up with something like, there are many environmental factors that significantly increase the risk of whatever disease this is. And if we're starting with a claim like that as our topic sentence, then, okay, tell us, for example, whatever those things are. And don't just tell us that they've been identified as risk factors. How? And it could be in RCTs, it could be in a cohort studies, whatever it is, and then give us a supporting citation. So don't just tell us this is what happened, tell us where that information came from. Now, some diseases are very straightforward and have a narrow number of identified triggers, but sometimes things are more complex. For example, if we were talking about type 2 diabetes, I lived in a part of the world where there were several genetic contributors to that predisposed people to A, obesity, B, type 2 diabetes, and 3, some particular variants of that. Now, if you're listing out all these different factors, especially if something where many different genetic mutations may lead to the disease, then it might be cumbersome to list them all. And so when you're giving supporting evidence, with this, for example, sentence, you don't need to list everything, but enough to support your argument, and then you can have a sentence that along the lines of the environmental risk factors are summarized in table 2, second table in there. And so now if you are going to be elaborating on this, you can now list the table and then discuss things in the table. Now where this goes, whether it's this sentence, the second sentence, or the third sentence, there are arguments for both. If you're summarizing the environmental and non-environmental risk factors, then you might mention earlier and say, okay, both of these are mentioned, and you get to the detailed discussion environmental factors down here. But let's say that you are adding a table now. Okay, well, let's go ahead and we'll just jump out of this list for the moment. And let's insert a table here. So let's say we are starting out with a 3-column, 6-row table. You can always add more. So what's going to go here? Okay, well, let's say this column is going to be environmental risk factors. Well, we do want these to be in the order that they're discussed. So let's say this is genetic risk factors, environmental risk factors, and then here what might be in there? Well, that's a question. We want all of our columns to be labeled. And that can be as simple as, okay, you're numbering these for ease of use, or it could be something else. If you can't find anything you want to put in there, that's fine. Just go ahead and delete that column. If I control click on this, or for a Mac, or just right click if it's a PC, you can always select things and delete the whole column, and then we're left with a 2-column table. I'm just going to push this off to the next page just so you can see it clearly. Alright, so we're going to have to do a couple things here. First, we need to have our table title. and our table label. And then whatever that is. And we don't want that to be indented, so I'll go ahead and remove that. We want the table label there to be bolded. Now our table here, whatever I'm putting in there, remember, we'll only have horizontal lines in a couple places, no vertical lines. So if I control click or right click if I'm on a PC, I can go to borders and shading. And it's often easiest if you just turn off all the borders right away. Now, if you do that, you see, okay, we can't see it's a table. So you go ahead and select that first row, borders and shading. And you can use these here to turn on borders above and below whatever you have selected. All right, now we can see that's the header row. Now, if we go ahead and select this bottom row here, we can do the same thing, borders and shading, turn on the bottom line. And now you can fill this in as need be. Now, if we're looking at this and say, okay, what might we put in here? What might be in that third column? Okay, well, one way you might do this, let's add a column to the left, sort these by severity. Perhaps. And if you're going to be using some delineation like this, remember that prefixes like pre and post and APA style don't get hyphenated. And then you can fill these in and even have a list of things in each of these cells, because you're not limited to just having one thing. Is there a clear organization there? So you could have many organized by light severity. And some of these might be blank. If a row is totally blank, just besides the label here, I would say take it out, because that will give you a cleaner and more useful table. But if postnatal was only for associated with one of these, that's fine. The other one doesn't need to be filled. You can leave it blank. Some people will put a little dash there, but usually leaving it blank is the clearer choice there. I often get questions about spacing here. The goal here is readability. So if you are going to double space your table, that's fine. It's not required in APA style. And you can also go as low as an 8-point font size. You've got a lot of information to fit in there. So the APA style is liberal on that, and which helps if you're going to be meeting a page limit like this. All right, so let's just recap what we've been doing. So we talked about the assignment instructions, particularly making sure to get all the detail captured in the rubric and not just the main assignment instructions. We talked about table formatting in APA 7th edition, about how to show synthesis and how this would fit within the larger arguments that you were laying out to fulfill the assignment prompts. And we talked about how to take all this and start the outline and drafting, including in particular how to format your tables in APA style. So with that, let us wrap things up. So if you are new to the Writing Center and you haven't made an appointment yet, you're welcome. Just go to my.acu.edu and go ahead and go to Resources, select Online Writing Center, and just follow the instructions from there. You can also send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu if you have a short question, or visit our website to download the template and other resources that you've seen me discuss and show today. And with that, I will say good night, good day, and hope to catch you soon.